Hello. Happy Friday. Wow. Oh, there's the puppy. He's been waiting. They have treats. And I made him wait until I started the stream. He's so excited. He take his treats and then he's done with me and he leaves for the other room. Puppy cam. Hang on. Special edition puppy cam. Oh, puppy cam. Oh, look at this pup. Wow. Oh, he wants treat. Such a star of the show. Star of the show, Ben. Gesundheit. Oh. Leaps into the room. Ben. Oh, you got itch. Hello. Here's the puppy. I'll just put you guys back. Oh. Special edition Friday puppy cam. Hey Sharkies. Happy Friday. How you doing? Puppy. I pat my leg and he's like, goodbye. He seems to kind of think that anybody patting their leg for him to like come up means go to Farmos's lap. Yep, bright and early tomorrow morning we've got someone coming to look at our house. Which means we gotta clean up and clear out. So how has your week been? I'm assuming by now the relatives have all gone home, unless it's an extended stay. An extended visit. I'm still cooling down a little bit, just got back from taking Ben for a walk. Yeah, Muggy is right. Actually, it was warm out when I took him for a walk, but I didn't notice it being particularly muggy. Only over for the evening. Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. Yeah. That's... I don't know how it's really muggy there. We're lucky we've got a pretty good air conditioner, at least after we fixed that malfunction, so it doesn't get too bad inside the house. Sometimes in the evenings it gets a bit warm. But right now it's all right. But I'm just, like I said, still cooling down myself from going for a walk. I don't know if undoing my hair will make it more or less cool. Less pulled back against my head anyways. I don't know how much Sharkies keep up with Marvel shows, but the first episode of She-Hulk is out on Disney+. We watched that yesterday. Looks like it's going to update every Thursday. That was pretty fun. I enjoyed it. Very feels much more like a comedy, sort of, so far. Much more lighthearted. It's possibly the warmest night yet last night. Only got down to 21. Oof. Well, I don't know about your place in particular, but, and I think I've talked about this a little before, but it seems like it gets warmer inside the house in the evenings than during the day, which there's some science behind. I've gone over that before. I don't need to do that again. Just be repeating myself. Lots of ice in my drink. Why did I shake it near the microphone? I don't know. You needed to hear that, right? Farmos really likes the She-Hulk so far. Yeah, I've read some comics that she made appearances in. I haven't read any, like, more than a page or two of actual She-Hulk comics, but I've read some Avengers comics that she shows up in. Some of her interactions with other characters. Yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty fun show. If you don't know much about the character, she's a lawyer with more control over her Hulk form than Bruce Banner. So she, you know, the whole like smart Hulk thing, she's got that where she can just maintain her personality while she's in Hulk form, but she's also like breaks the fourth wall. She's been doing that in comics since, you know, before Deadpool existed. So there's definitely like talking to the audience kind of thing. Yeah. So it's sort of a like, I don't know, like superhero lawyer comedy. Something like that. Hmm. Yeah, I read some comics. Um, but not as much as, I don't know, not like heavy duty. I own a lot of comics, but I just don't spend the time sometimes to read them. Kind of the whole, you know, when you want to be reading and you're just not. Something I like about doing this stream is it keeps me actually reading year round. Because otherwise I kind of have like phases of reading. I'll have like 3 months where I just want to be reading nonstop. I will, you know, finish book after book after book, and then like the rest of the year, I'm just not reading anything. Mrs. Sharkey's read a bit of Ms. Marvel and Squirrel Girl. I mean, great characters, so. Squirrel Girl is hilarious. Doreen Green. I'm wondering, she's gonna show up in the MCU at some point. I'm just wondering how long that's gonna be. I imagine it'll be sooner rather than later. I think she's gonna show up soon. I mean, I feel like a show like She-Hulk would be an opportunity for her to show up because I know those two characters have interactions. Um, Depending on what they do, because I believe they're bringing back. I know they're bringing back Daredevil, and I think they're bringing back Jessica Jones. And Squirrel Girl was a babysitter for Jessica Jones for a while. Of course, Ms. Marvel and Squirrel Girl have interactions with each other. So I feel like there are a lot of characters that are either sort of already in the MCU or that are upcoming that Squirrel Girl has an in with, that they could introduce her. I hope they don't mess with that character too much, in that I like that she's this like undefeated character that has like taken down Thanos and, like Galactus. Um, and, just all the like heavy hitting villains. Squirrel Girl's defeated Doctor Doom. Mister's in a similar boat, keeps up reading through the stream and leading Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I think that's something nice about this reading with other people format, is it kind of provides motivation to continue actually reading beyond, you know, for those of us with some executive dysfunction. There are some weird older villains, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's some weird newer villains too. But I also feel like a lot of times, I don't know, I feel like there's sort of this odd divide in comics right now between uber serious and gritty and really, really campy and cartoony. Um, and not that that's necessarily a new divide, but I feel like it feels pretty stark in contrast right now. Um, Versus like, I don't know. I don't know if there's a lot of storytelling in the same style as like 60s and 70s Spider-Man, where it was like kind of, it was telling stories that were maybe serious, but it wasn't necessarily telling them in a very serious way. Like, it wasn't trying to be too gritty. Like, maybe serious stories with unrealistic characters. I don't know. Squirrel Girl's original comics are really weird too. I was reading a run of the Avengers, which consisted of like Spider-Man and Sentry and Power Man Luke Cage, and Wolverine, um, and there were some others as well. But as a result of Luke Cage being in the group, they ended up at his home at one point, and ran into Squirrel Girl, who was babysitting. And there was this weird moment of tension between Squirrel Girl and Wolverine, where like they clearly had a history with each other, and it was like, I thought we agreed we weren't going to see each other again. No, it was an accident. I didn't know you were here. I don't think that ever actually got explained, but it's possible maybe, like, I don't know, they've got a weird history with each other. Some really bizarre. Well, Squirrel Girl's not even that, yeah, that old, right? Because I remember when she was first introduced, it was like the Watcher being, and like Squirrel Girl standing over Thanos, and the Watcher being like, "Oh my God, Squirrel Girl has defeated Thanos, and as the Watcher, I can confirm that this is the real Thanos, and it's not a clone or a robot or an illusion." Like, I don't know, because she was originally like just a joke character, just her like kind of off panel defeating all of the like heaviest hitters. And I feel like she maybe, I was gonna make a guess as her first appearance, but I can just look it up. Yeah, it looks like 1991. So, yeah, about when I was gonna say. Her old appearance with the like diamond eye makeup was really odd, though. Squirrel. I don't. I'm not sure about what you're saying about Bozo the Iron Man, but yeah, no. Squirrel Girl first appeared in 1991, so she is. I want to say not that old. Like, what is that? 30 years now? 31. So we've only got like 3 chapters left. We're on 25. We've got to get through 25, 26, and 27. I saw the headline that you posted and the like picture attached with like a locker room or something, but I didn't actually read it. Um, it is, yeah, it's always an immersive experience of being a teen in the 90s. That's so specific, I feel like. This is probably being set up by someone who was a teen in the 90s and just wants to be nostalgic. It's weird, like, I know Farmos and I have gone to, like, a museum in Victoria and seen, like toys from our childhood and things like that in the museum. And that's weird. Like an interactive temporary museum in a mall. Oh, boy. So, 3 chapters. Um, where we left our heroes, they were just uh, seeing from a distance Rak Cthol for the first time. Well, I guess it's probably not the first time. It's definitely not the first time for Belgarath and maybe Polgara, probably, but everyone else, the first time. And we got that description of it that was very Castle of Doom. Like, very much your stereotypical 80s evil castle. Way up on top of a spire of rock and all black, and it looks like the walls are bleeding, and there's jagged turrets sticking out randomly from the sides, and spires stabbing at the sky out the top. And I guess technically they're also like still kind of dealing with the tail end of that ash, that volcano storm, so there could still be some flickers of lightning if you want to throw some of those in there. Belongs on the side of a van. Yeah. Expect there to be a Dracula in it. Watch out for Moon Knight. Dracula owes him money. Some kind of Dracula. Yeah, so I'm going to start reading. I figure we'll definitely finish a chapter, maybe we'll get through 2, and then one way or another we'll finish up next week. Either Wednesday or Friday, depending on if we read 1 or 2 tonight. Yeah, so chapter 25, page 269. As the last trace of light slid from the sky, they moved carefully down off the ridge and crossed the ash-covered sand toward the rock tower looming above them. When they reached the shattered scree at its base, they dismounted, left the horses with Dernick, and climbed up the steeply sloped rubble to the rock face of the basalt pinnacle that blotted out the stars. Although Relg had been shuddering and hiding his eyes a moment before, he moved almost eagerly now. He stopped, and then carefully placed his hands and forehead against the icy rock. I look up just to such a random phrase or quote. Well, Belgarath asked after a moment, his voice hushed, but carrying a note of dreadful concern. I guess Belgarath really has been gambling a lot on this moment right here. As if there aren't caves under Rak Cthol, they're in a lot of trouble. Was I right? Are there caves? I haven't done Relg's voice for a little while, I feel like. There are open spaces, Relg replied. They're a long way inside. Can you get to them? There's no point. They don't go anywhere. They're just closed-in hollows. Now what? Silk asked. I don't know, Belgarath admitted, sounding terribly disappointed. Let's try a little farther around, Relg suggested. I can feel some echoes here. There might be something off in that direction. He pointed. I want one thing clearly understood, right here and now, Silk announced, planting his feet firmly. I'm not going to go through any more rock. If there's going to be any of that, I'll stay behind. We'll come up with something, Barak told him. Silk shook his head stubbornly. No passing through rock, he declared adamantly. He was not kidding around about how much he dislikes that experience. Relg was already moving along the face, his fingers lightly touching the basalt. It's getting stronger, he told them. It's large, and it goes up. He moved on another 100 yards or so, and they followed, watching him intently. It's right through here, he said finally, patting the rock face with one hand. It might be the one we want. Wait here. He put his hands against the rock and pushed them slowly into the basalt. I can't stand this, Silk said, turning his back quickly. Let me know once he's inside. With a kind of dreadful determination, Relg pushed his way into the rock. Dreadful determination. I feel like that something like that gets used every time Relg goes into rock. Also, something in my sinuses feels rattly while I'm talking. Hear it like buzzing a little. Yeah. Is he gone yet? Silk asked. He's going in, Barak replied clinically. Only half of him still sticking out. Please, Barak, don't tell me about it. Was it really that bad? The big man asked. You have no idea. You have absolutely no idea. The rat-faced man was shivering uncontrollably. They waited in the chill darkness for half an hour or more. Somewhere high above them, there was a scream. "What was that cry?" Mandaralin asked. Everybody ready? "The Grolims are busy," Belgarath answered grimly. "It's the season of the wounding, when the orb burned Torak's hand and face. A large number of sacrifices are called for at this time of year. Usually slaves. Torak doesn't seem to insist on Angarak blood. As long as it's human, it seems to satisfy him." There was a faint sound of steps somewhere along the cliff, and a few moments later, Relg rejoined them. "I found it," he told them. "The opening's about a half-mile farther along. It's partially blocked." "Does it go all the way up?" Belgarath demanded. Relg shrugged. "It goes up. I can't say how far. The only way to find out for sure is to follow it. The whole series of caves is fairly extensive, though." Do we really have any choice, Father?" Aunt Pole asked. "No, I suppose not." "I'll go get Dernick," Silk said. He turned and disappeared into the darkness. The rest of them followed Relg until they reached a small hole in the rock face just above the tumbled scree. Scree. It's not a word you see very often. "We'll have to move some of this rubble if we're going to get your animals inside," he told them. Barak bent and lifted a large stone block. He staggered under its weight and dropped it to one side with a clatter. "Quietly," Belgarath told him. "Sorry," Barak mumbled. For the most part, the stones were not large, but there were a great many of them. When Silk and Dernick joined them, they all fell to clearing the rubble out of the cave mouth. Ah, yes. That is the definition of scree. Which, this is exactly the correct usage of it. When Silk and Dernick joined them, they all fell to clearing the rubble out of the cave mouth. It took them nearly an hour to remove enough rock to make it possible for the horses to squeeze through. "I wish Hetar was here," Barak grunted, putting his shoulder against the rump of a balky pack horse. "Talk to him, Barak," Silk suggested. "I am talking." "Try it without all the curse words?" "There's going to be some climbing involved," Relg told them after they had pushed the last horse inside, and stood in the total blackness of the cave. "As nearly as I can tell, the galleries run vertically, so we'll have to climb from level to level." Mandaralin leaned against one of the walls, and his armor clinked. "That's not going to work," Belgarath told him. "You wouldn't be able to climb in armor anyway. Leave it here with the horses, Mandaralin." The knight sighed and began removing his armor. A faint glow appeared as Relg mixed powders in a wooden bowl from 2 leather pouches he carried inside his mail shirt.
"That's better,"
Barak approved.
"But wouldn't a torch be brighter?"
"Much brighter," Relg agreed. "But then I wouldn't be able to see. This will give you enough light to see where you're going."
"Let's get started,"
Belgarath said. Relg handed the glowing bowl to Barak and turned to lead them up a dark gallery. After they had gone a few hundred yards, they came to a steep slope of rubble rising up into the darkness.
"I'll look,"
Relg said, and scrambled up the slope out of sight. After a moment or so, they heard a peculiar popping sound, and tiny fragments of rock showered down onto the rubble from above.
"Come up now,"
Relg's voice came to them. Carefully, they climbed the rubble until they reached a sheer wall.
"To your right,"
Relg said, still above them.
"You'll find some holes in the rock you can use to climb up."
They found the holes, quite round and about 6 inches deep. "How did you make these?" Dernick asked, examining one of the holes.
"It's a bit difficult to explain,"
Relg replied.
"There's a ledge up here. It leads to another gallery."
One by one they climbed the rock face to join Relg on the ledge. As he had told them, the ledge led to a gallery that angled sharply upward. They followed it toward the center of the peak, passing several passageways opening to the sides.
"Shouldn't we see where they go?"
Barak asked after they had passed the 3rd or 4th passageway.
"They don't go any place,"
Relg told him.
"How can you be sure?"
"A gallery that goes someplace feels different. That one we just passed comes to a blank wall about 100 feet in."
Barak grunted dubiously. They came to another sheer face, and Relg stopped to peer up into the blackness. "How high is it?" Dernick asked.
30 feet or so. I'll make some holes so we can climb up."
Relg knelt and slowly pushed one hand into the face of the rock. Then he tensed his shoulder and twisted his arm slightly. The rock popped with a sharp little detonation. When Relg pulled his hand out, a shower of fragments came with it. He brushed the rest of the debris out of the hole he had made, stood up, and sank his other hand into the rock about 2 feet above the first hole. "Clever," Silk admired.
"It's a very old trick,"
Relg told him. They followed Relg up the face and squeezed through a narrow crack at the top. Barak muttered curses as he wriggled through, leaving a fair amount of skin behind. "How far have we come?" Silk asked. His voice had a certain apprehension in it, and he looked about nervously at the rock, which seemed to press in all around them.
"We're about 800 feet above the base of the pinnacle,"
Relg replied.
"We go that way now."
He pointed up another sloping passageway. "Isn't that back in the direction we just came?" Dernick asked.
"The cave zigzags," Relg told him. "We have to keep following the galleries that lead upward."
Zigzag is a little bit of an odd word, isn't it? I don't know if it's not exactly onomatopoeic, like it I don't think so, but, you can picture, right, zigzag. But, yeah, I don't know. It's a little... I know, like, all words are made up, but it feels kind of made up. Makes the shape of the first letter, yeah.
We have to keep following the galleries that lead upward.
Do they go all the way to the top?
They open out somewhere. That's all I can tell for sure at this point.
What's that? Silk cried sharply. From somewhere along one of the dark passageways, a voice floated out at them, singing. There seemed to be a deep sadness in the song, but the echoes made it impossible to pick out the words. About all they could be sure of was the fact that the singer was a woman. After a moment, Belgarath gave a startled exclamation. What's wrong? Aunt Pole asked him.
Marag!
The old man said. That's impossible.
I know the song, Pole. It's a Marag funeral song. Whoever she is, she's very close to dying.
Marag as in Maragor. The echoes in the twisting passageways made it very difficult to pinpoint the singer's exact location, but as they moved, the sound seemed to be getting closer. Down here, Silk said finally, stopping with his head cocked to one side in front of an opening. The singing stopped abruptly. No closer, the unseen woman warned sharply. I have a knife. We're friends, Lernick called to her. She laughed bitterly at that. I have no friends. You're not going to take me back. My knife is long enough to reach my heart. She thinks we're Murgos, Silk whispered. Belgarath raised his voice, speaking in a language Garion had never heard before. This is foreign language number, 4 at most, I think? After a moment, the woman answered haltingly, as if trying to remember words she had not spoken for years.
She thinks it's a trick,
the old man told them quietly.
She says she's got a knife right against her heart, so we're going to have to be careful.
He spoke again into the dark passageway, and the woman answered him. The language they were speaking was liquid, musical.
She says she'll let one of us go to her,
Belgarath said finally.
She still doesn't trust us.
Farmos thinks just two. Ulgo language, Marag language. I don't remember whether there's been an Angarak language actually used. There might have been. And... excuse me. And the Ulgo language, I think, remains the only one that's been spoken aloud where we've seen the words. Where it's been spelled out. Yeah, that might be it. I mean, not counting the Drasnian secret language, which, maybe we should be counting, but I'm not sure how sign languages play into language counts. Because, yeah, it hasn't been used nearly as much. I feel like in the first 2 books, it got used pretty constantly from once it was introduced. But since then, more recently in this book, I feel like it hasn't come up very often. There was a little period there where it felt like just everybody knew the secret language. But I guess that was when we were encountering a lot more Drasnians and people who knew Drasnians. When we were in Eloria still.
she still doesn't trust us.
I'll go, Aunt Pole told him.
Be careful, Pole. She might decide at the last minute to use her knife on you instead of herself.
I can handle it, Father. Aunt Pole took the light from Barak and moved slowly on down the passageway, speaking calmly as she went. The rest of them stood in the darkness, listening intently to the murmur of voices coming from the passageway, as Aunt Pole talked quietly to the Marag woman. You can come now, she called to them finally, and they went down the passageway toward her voice. The woman was lying beside a small pool of water. She was dressed only in scanty rags, and she was very dirty. Her hair was a lustrous black, but badly tangled, and her face had a resigned, hopeless look on it. She had wide cheekbones, full lips, and huge, violet eyes framed with sooty black lashes. The few pitiful rags she wore exposed a great deal of her pale skin. Relg drew in a sharp breath and immediately turned his back. Her name is Taiba. T-A-I-B-A, Taiba. Aunt Pole told them quietly. She escaped from the slave pens under Rak Cthol several days ago. Belgarath knelt beside the exhausted woman.
You're a Marag, aren't you?
He asked her intently. All right. I need to figure out Taiba's voice. Gotta be careful not to make her sound too much like Aunt Pole, but she's definitely not going to sound like Sinedra. Maybe I'll try to go like deeper or lower than Aunt Pole's. My mother told me I was, she confirmed. How's that? She's the one who taught me the old language. Does that sound feminine enough? It's almost... Farmos thinks it. It's almost a good thing for me that there aren't too many female characters in these books, because you think it'll settle once I use it more. I'll try. But yeah, I'm not good at doing the... I'm on Briar. Hey, how's it going? Just on our third last chapter of this book. So we'll probably finish one or two tonight and then wrap up the book next week, maybe next Wednesday or Friday. I'm doing decently. It's a bit warm, but not too bad here right now, which is good. Definitely cooler than it was earlier this week. How's the pupper? Oh, we better ask him. And there he is. Look at that guy. You were summoned. Emon Briars wants to say hi. What? I want to give you a pet. He doesn't like being picked up while I'm in my computer, like in this chair. So he gets nervous when I reach for him because he's like, oh no, you're going to pick me up. Which is funny because sometimes he doesn't mind, like, if I'm on a couch or something like that. But So what are you reading these days, Mr. Breyer? Yeah, Sharky's Aunt Pole being similar to Silk. Yes, yes, I definitely noticed that. I try to keep Aunt Pole's voice a little softer, and I try to put usually a little more expression into Silk's voice, and that's how I kind of keep them separated myself. You're almost finished with Frankenstein. Mary Shelley. How's that been? Have you read it before? I will admit, I've never actually. We'll be doing short horror stories in September. Ooh. I've never actually read Frankenstein. I've read Dracula, and I've read Three Musketeers, sort of in terms of older works of fiction, but it's your first read through, tad rough but good. The first science fiction. You'll be doing Dracula in October. Have you read Dracula before? Public domain horror, yeah. Yeah, that's something that I probably should pay more attention to, but have not been doing. Dracula was very interesting, I thought. It's got an odd divide where it feels like about halfway through there's this sort of break, and then the storytelling style feels like it changes drastically. Like it almost feels like halfway through it almost switches genres somehow. I don't know if that's exactly right, but without going into, plot details or anything like that, but just the actual writing style feels like, I don't know, it just, the location changes, the setting, the style, just it changes pretty severely from one half to the other. And I didn't mind that myself. I found it kind of an interesting change. But some people I've seen reading it are like, "Oh, I liked the first half and I did not like the second." So I'm curious what your experience with that's going to be like. I'd consider reading Three Musketeers on this stream at some point, because that was a fun book. Was the second half from his point of view? I thought it was maybe from the point of view of a different character. It has been a while since I've read it, so I might be misremembering that part. Alright, I'm going to continue. We just met a new character, so I'm kind of trying to figure out the voice for Taiba. Maybe, but it's for two different people. So, that's what research says. All right, fair enough. I'm going to get details wrong, but apparently there's a translation of Dracula in a different language that was done quite a long time ago, and it wasn't until fairly recently when somebody went and kind of translated it back or read this translation that had read more of an original of Dracula and realized that the translation was very different and felt almost like fan fiction. And now I think it's been retranslated, this other version has been, it's Icelandic. Yeah, I was thinking it was something like that. It's been retranslated under a different title, like Heart of Darkness or something, I don't know. Sort of an odd thing to happen. Sharky say it's Swedish, then translated into Icelandic. that are different. Okay, so let me see if I can do this again. My mother told me I was, she confirmed. She's the one who taught me the old language. Her dark hair fell across one of her pale cheeks in a shadowy tangle.
Are there any other Marags in the slave pens?
A few, I think. It's hard to tell. Most of the other slaves have had their tongues cut out. Ugh. She needs food, Aunt Pole said. Did anyone think to bring anything? I hope so. Dernick untied a pouch from his belt and handed it to her. Some cheese, he said, and a bit of dried meat. Aunt Pole opened the pouch.
Have you any idea how your people came to be here?
Belgarath asked the slave woman.
Think. It could be very important.
Taiba shrugged. We've always been here. She took the food Aunt Pole offered her and began to eat ravenously. Not too fast, Aunt Pole warned.
Have you ever heard anything about how Marags wound up in the slave pens of the Murgos?
Belgarath pressed. My mother told me once that thousands of years ago we lived in a country under the open sky, and that we weren't slaves then, Taiba replied. I didn't believe her, though. It's the sort of story you tell children. There are some old stories about the Tolnedran campaign in Maragor, Belgarath, Silk remarked. Rumors have been floating around for years that some of the Legion commanders sold their prisoners to the Nissen slavers instead of killing them. It's the sort of thing a Tolnedran would do.
It's a possibility, I suppose,
Belgarath replied, frowning.
Do we have to stay here?
Relg demanded harshly. His back was still turned, and there was a rigidity to it that spoke his outrage loudly. Why is he angry with me? Taiba asked, her voice dropping wearily from her lips in scarcely more than a whisper.
Cover your nakedness, woman,
Relg told her.
You're an affront to decent eyes.
Is that all? She laughed, a rich, throaty sound. These are all the clothes I have. She looked down at her lush figure. Besides, there's nothing wrong with my body. It's not deformed or ugly. Why should I hide it?
Lewd woman,
Relg accused her. If it bothers you so much, don't look, she suggested. Relg has a certain religious problem, Silk told her dryly. Don't mention religion, she said with a shudder.
You see,
Relg snorted.
She's completely depraved. Not exactly,
Belgarath told him.
In Rak Cthol, the word religion means the altar and the knife.
Garion, Aunt Pole said, give me your cloak. He unfastened his heavy wool cloak and handed it to her. She started to cover the exhausted slave woman with it, but stopped suddenly and looked closely at her. Where are your children? She asked. The Murgos took them, Taiba replied in a dead voice. They were 2 baby girls, very beautiful, but they're gone now. We'll get them back for you, Garion promised impulsively. She gave a bitter little laugh. I don't think so. The Murgos gave them to the Grolims, and the Grolims sacrificed them on the altar of Torak. Cthulhu himself held the knife. Garion felt his blood run cold. Yeah, I don't think so. Impulsive, but he's just trying to be nice. This cloak is warm, Taiba said gratefully, her hands smoothing the rough cloth. I've been cold for such a long time. She sighed with a sort of weary contentment. Belgarath and Aunt Pole were looking at each other across Taiba's body.
I must be doing something right,
the old man remarked cryptically after a moment.
To stumble across her like this after all these years of searching.
Are you sure she's the right one, Father?
She almost has to be. Everything fits together too well, right down to the last detail.
He drew in a deep breath and then let it out explosively.
That's been worrying me for 1,000 years.
He suddenly looked enormously pleased with himself.
How did you escape from the slave pens, Taiba?
He asked gently. One of the Murgos forgot to lock a door, she replied, her voice drowsy. After I slipped out, I found this knife. I was going to try to find Cthulhu and kill him with it, but I got lost. There are so many caves down here. So many. I wish I could kill him before I die, but I don't suppose there's much hope for that now. She sighed regretfully. I think I'd like to sleep now. I'm so very tired. Will you be all right here? Aunt Pole asked her. We have to leave, but we'll be back. Do you need anything? A little light, maybe? Taiba sighed. I've lived in the dark all my life. I think I'd like it to be light when I die. Relg, Aunt Pole said, make her some light.
We might need it ourselves.
His voice was still stiffly offended. She needs it more.
Do it, Relg,
Belgarath told the zealot in a firm voice. Relg's face hardened, but he mixed some of the contents of his 2 pouches together on a flat stone and dribbled a bit of water on the mixture. The pasty substance began to glow. Thank you, Taiba said simply. Relg refused to answer or even to look at her. So horribly tragic, no kidding. Her whole story just is... And like her mom saying, 1,000 years ago, our people lived under the open sky. They went back up the passageway, leaving her beside the small pool with her dim little light. She began to sing again, quite softly this time, and in a voice near the edge of sleep. Relg led them through the dark galleries, twisting and changing course frequently, always climbing. Hours dragged by, though time had little meaning in the perpetual darkness. They climbed more of the sheer faces and followed passageways that wound higher and higher up into the vast rock pillar. Garion lost track of direction as they climbed, and found himself wondering if Relg even knew which way he was going. As they rounded another corner in another gallery, a faint breeze seemed to touch their faces. The breeze carried a dreadful odor with it. "What's that stink?" Silk asked, wrinkling his sharp nose.
The slave pens, most likely,
Belgarath replied.
Murgos are lax about sanitation.
The pens are under Rak Cthol, aren't they?
Barak asked. Belgarath nodded.
And they open up into the city itself?
As I remember it, they do.
You've done it, Relg,
Barak said, clapping the Elgo on the shoulder.
Don't touch me,
Relg told him.
Sorry, Relg.
The slave pens are going to be guarded,
Belgarath told them.
We'll want to be very quiet now.
They crept on up the passageway, being careful where they put their feet. Geryon was not certain at what point the gallery began to show evidence of human construction. Finally, they passed a partially open iron door. Is there anybody in there? He whispered to Silk. The little man sidled up to the opening, his dagger held low and ready. He glanced in, his head making a quick, darting movement. Just some bones, he reported somberly. Belgarath signaled for a halt.
These lower galleries have probably been abandoned,
he told them in a very quiet voice.
After the causeway was finished, the Murgos didn't need all those thousands of slaves. We'll go on up, but be quiet and keep your eyes open.
They padded silently up the gradual incline of the gallery, passing more of the rusting iron doors, all standing partially ajar. At the top of the slope, the gallery turned back sharply on itself, still angling upward. Some words were crudely lettered on the wall in a script Geryon could not recognize. "Grandfather," he whispered, pointing at the words. Belgarath glanced at the lettering and grunted.
9th level,
he muttered.
We're still some distance below the city.
How far do we go before we start running into Murgos?
Barak rumbled, looking around with his hand on his sword hilt. Belgarath shrugged slightly.
It's hard to say. I'd guess that only the top 2 or 3 levels are occupied.
They followed the gallery upward until it turned sharply, and once again there were words written on the wall in the alien script.
8th level,
Belgarath translated.
Keep going.
The smell of the slave pens grew stronger as they progressed upward through the succeeding levels. "Light ahead," Dernick warned sharply, just before they turned the corner to enter the 4th level. "Wait here," Silk breathed, and melted around the corner, his dagger held close against his leg. The light was dim and seemed to be bobbing slightly, growing gradually brighter as the moments dragged by.
Someone with a torch,
Barak muttered. The torchlight suddenly flickered, throwing gyrating shadows. Then it grew steady, no longer bobbing. After a few moments, Silk came back, carefully wiping his dagger. "A Murgo," he told them. "I think he was looking for something. The cells up there are still empty."
What did you do with him?
Barak asked. "I dragged him into one of the cells. They won't stumble over him unless they're looking for him." What do we think? Does that count? Like a stealth check and a sneak attack? Melting around a corner equals a high stealth roll. Using a dagger. I think that might be it. Does everyone agree? Alright, everyone. O down. Bingo. Whoa, whoa. Bingo. We did it. Well, our first bingo. Still haven't figured out what that means, but we did it. We filled. Bingo! Yay! I'd throw some confetti if I had some, except I also wouldn't because we've got to show the house off tomorrow and I don't want to have to clean that up. Extreme left, something fancy for bingo? Yeah. Mime confetti. Oh boy. I feel like I should be playing some kind of music or something. Well, I feel like I'll continue to fill in spaces as we go, just see if we can get another one, but that's everything you wanted it to be. We did it! Oh, down! Bingo! We've come close on a few others before, but that's definitely it. So our spaces were Grim Bard, which honestly could have been the free space, it turns out. I feel like it's come up much more frequently than our free space. Pyrodernic. Sinedra weirdly watching Gary, and it's a good thing we got that before she left the group. Crying, and Silk being a D&D rogue. We definitely could have easily missed this one if Sinedra had left a little before, like if we'd started this card slightly later. But we caught Sinedra's space just before she left. So that also puts us closer to one of the diagonals. If we have Belgarath or Pole being snobbish about magic, or Garion doing something unexpected. We've also got on the top line still Garion getting cocky, and now on the bottom line, disbelief in magic, plus Mandaralin being very confident could get us another one after that new space has been added. Next bingo card for this series, Grim should be the free space, yeah. Yeah, I think so. Sometimes it comes up, you know, repeatedly just on the same, like, within 2 sentences in the last chapter. Barely anything in Eye Down, yeah. Eye Down could honestly even just be completely empty, depending on how you count the Sinedra one. I feel like we've had a lot of close calls in Eye Down. Like, 3 of the remaining spaces in that. Like, Sinedra issuing orders was kind of a close one. We've been close with Garion and being uncomfortable with world leaders. We've been close with nonsense arguments. And we've been close with Garion getting cocky. But just all of them were like, nah, not quite. Not quite. And then likewise, G. We definitely had the Silk being very sarcastic. That one was very clear cut. But Hetar left the group before encountering any more Murgos. Garion just hasn't been kidnapped. Which is so weird, right? It's been so long since Garion's been kidnapped. We've been a little close with Garion doing something unexpected. There have been things where it's like, does that count? Garion was uncomfortable lots, just not with world leaders. Yeah, we didn't have very much interaction between Garion and Ul, or not Ul, the Gorim. We didn't have very much interaction between Garion and the Gorim. Lots between Sinedra and the Gorim, and Sinedra was definitely uncomfortable. Yeah, so we've had Sinedra being uncomfortable with the world leader, and someone else other than Garion being kidnapped. So maybe if those spaces were slightly more broad, if we just left it to somebody being uncomfortable with the world leader or somebody being kidnapped, then we'd have 2 more spaces. All right. Bingo. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So, they won't stumble over him unless they're looking for him. Relg was carefully veiling his eyes. Even that little bit of light? Dernick asked him.
It's the color of it,
Relg explained. As they rounded the corner into the 4th level and started up again... Oh, did I say as? They rounded the corner into the 4th level and started up again. We could, if you want to. I'd like to see the Sharkies take a stab at it too. I want to see their interpretation. And I feel like we could replace Belgarath being a dirty old man with Relg. Relg being a perv. So, they rounded the corner into the 4th level and started up again. 100 yards up the gallery was a torch. 100 yards up the gallery, a torch was stuck into a crack in the wall, burning steadily. As they approached it, they could see a long smear of fresh blood on the uneven, littered floor. Belgarath stopped outside the cell door, scratching at his beard. That could definitely be a space. Belgarath. Belgarath's got fleas.
What was he wearing?
He asked Silk. One of those hooded robes, Silk replied. Why?
Go get it.
Silk looked at him briefly, then nodded. He went back into the cell and came out a moment later carrying a black Murgo robe. He handed it to the old man. Belgarath held up the robe, looking critically at the long cut running up the back.
Try not to put such big holes in the rest of them,
he told the little man. The rest of them. I like the unstated, obviously we're going to be collecting these. Silk grinned at him. Sorry, I guess I got a bit overenthusiastic. I'll be more careful from now on. He glanced at Barak. Care to join me? He invited.
Naturally. Coming, Mandaralin?
The knight nodded gravely, loosening his sword in its sheath.
We'll wait here, then,
Belgarath told them.
Be careful, but don't take any longer than you have to.
Mr. Wolf's got fleas. That's going to be a space on the bingo card. The 3 men moved stealthily on up the gallery toward the 3rd level. Can you guess at the time, Father? Aunt Pole asked quietly after they had disappeared.
Several hours after midnight.
Will we have enough time left before dawn?
If we hurry.
Maybe we should wait out the day here and go up when it gets dark again. He frowned.
I don't think so, Pole. Knuchik's up to something. He knows I'm coming. I felt that for the last week. But he hasn't made a move of his own yet. Let's not give him any more time than we have to.
He's going to fight you, Father.
It's long overdue anyway.
She asked Mr. Wolf the time. Yep, that just happened. Good catch. Good catch. He's going to fight you, Father.
It's long overdue anyway, he replied. Ktuchik and I have been stepping around each other for thousands of years because the time was never just exactly right. Now it's finally come down to this.
Nice. That's great. What time is it, Mr. Wolf? Have you been waiting for this moment? He looked off into the darkness, his face bleak.
When it starts, I want you to stay out of it, Paul.
She looked at the grim-faced old man for a long moment, then nodded. Whatever you say, Father, she said. Waiting since the first book. It's too bad that the Bard emote doesn't really show up very well against black. Or like on dark mode. On light mode in the chat, I've got my browser window open in light mode, and it looks great there. But in dark mode, it's you just see like the tops of the letters. So that's the end of chapter 25, and it is 8:18 PST. Or is it PDT right now? I think it's PST right now. Yeah, should we continue to chapter 26 now? How do people feel? It sounds like Sharkies are a little tired. Chapter 26 is probably, you know what, it's not as long as I expected. It is 11 pages. So I think that's the same as the one we just read. So it would take probably in the range of about an hour. And then the final chapter goes from page 293 to 305, which makes it about 12 pages, 11 or 12-ish. Yeah, let's keep going. All right. Chapter 26. Fridays, we can go later, yeah. So we'll read chapter 26, and then next Wednesday we'll read chapter 27, and we'll finish up this book. And then after that, we'll have to figure out what to read next. And we will be over halfway through this series at that point. I mean, at this point, technically, we're over halfway through this series. You know, the halfway of this book would have been halfway through the series, depending on whether you count The Mandalorian. Wait, not The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian Star Wars. The Malorian. The Malorian. Depending on whether you count the Malorian. Or is that Maloriad? I think it's the Malorian. Between Mandaralin and the Malorian. Just combine those both together and you get the Mandalorian. almost was like Mandaralin. Yep. No Mandalore in this book. So, we're over halfway done the Belgariad at this point. And we have less than half of the books remaining. All right, chapter 26. The Murgo robe was made of coarse black cloth, and it had a strange red emblem woven into the fabric just over Garion's heart. It smelled of smoke and of something else even more unpleasant. There was a small ragged hole in the robe just under the left armpit, and the cloth around the hole was wet and sticky. Garion's skin cringed away from that wetness. They were moving rapidly up through the galleries of the last 3 levels of the slave pens, with the deep cowled hoods of the Murgo robes hiding their faces. Though the galleries were lighted by sooty torches, they encountered no guards, and the slaves locked behind the pitted iron doors made no sound as they passed. Garion could feel the dreadful fear behind those doors. "How do we get up into the city?" Dernick whispered. "There's a stairway at the upper end of the top gallery," Silk replied softly. "Is it guarded?" "Not any more." An iron-barred gate, chained and locked, blocked the top of the stairway, but Silk bent and drew a slim metal implement from one boot, probed inside the lock for a few seconds, then grunted with satisfaction as the lock clicked open in his hand. If we didn't already have that bingo space, we would now. Why do antagonists who get infiltrated always wear large robes? Is it a required uniform? I'm pretty sure we've encountered Grolems in robes before, haven't we? Not certain. They're religious robes. I feel like I've got a loose eyelash poking me in the eye. So he grunted with satisfaction as the lock clicked open in his hand. "I'll have a look," he whispered, and slipped out. Beyond the gate, Garion could see the stars, and, outlined against them, the looming buildings of Rak Cthol. A scream, agonized and despairing, echoed through the city, followed after a moment by the hollow sound of some unimaginably huge iron gong. Garion shuddered. It's interesting that our evil castle here has these screams in them, but they've been explained. We know why there's horrible screams. A few moments later, Silk slipped back through the gate. "There doesn't seem to be anybody about," he murmured softly. "Which way do we go?" Belgarath pointed.
"That way. We'll go along the wall to the temple." "The temple?"
Relg asked sharply.
"We have to go through it to get to Ktuchik,"
the old man replied.
"We're going to have to hurry. Morning isn't far off."
Rak Cthol was not like other cities. The vast buildings had little of that separateness that they had in other places. It was as if the Murgos and Grolems who lived here had no sense of personal possession, so that their structures lacked that insularity of individual property to be found among the houses in the cities of the West. There were no streets in the ordinary sense of the word, but rather interconnecting courtyards and corridors that passed between and, quite often, through the buildings.
The city seemed deserted as they crept silently through the dark courtyards and shadowy corridors, yet there was a kind of menacing watchfulness about the looming, silent black walls around them. Wow. Peculiar-looking turrets jutted from the walls in unexpected places, leaning out over the courtyards, brooding down at them as they passed. That's interesting. So these weird turrets go inwards as well as outwards. Narrow windows stared accusingly at them, and the arched doorways were filled with lurking shadows. An oppressive air of ancient evil lay heavily on Rak Cthol, and the stones themselves seemed almost to gloat as Garion and his friends moved deeper and deeper into the dark maze of the Grolim fortress.
"Are you sure you know where you're going?"
Barak whispered nervously to Belgarath.
"I've been here before, using the causeway,"
the old man told him quietly.
"I like to keep an eye on Cthulchik from time to time. We go up those stairs. They'll take us to the top of the city wall."
The stairway was narrow and steep, with massive walls on either side and a vaulted roof overhead. Is that barking coming through the microphone? There's some small dog outside. The stone steps were worn by centuries of use. They climbed silently. Another scream echoed through the city, and the huge gong sounded its iron note once more. Ah, yes, the ambush stairway. When they emerged from the stairway, they were atop the outer wall. It was as broad as a highway and encircled the entire city. A parapet ran along its outer edge, marking the brink of the dreadful precipice that dropped away to the floor of the rocky wasteland a mile or more below. Once they emerged from the shelter of the buildings, the chill air bit at them, and the black flagstones and rough-hewn blocks of the outer parapet glittered with frost in the icy starlight. Belgarath looked at the open stretch lying along the top of the wall ahead of them, and at the shadowy buildings looming several hundred yards ahead.
"We'd better spread out,"
he whispered.
"Too many people in one place attract attention in Rak Cthol. We'll go across here 2 at a time. Walk. Don't run or crouch down. Try to look as if you belong here. Let's go."
He started along the top of the wall with Barak at his side, the two of them walking purposefully, but not appearing to hurry. After a few moments, Aunt Pole and Mandaralin followed. "Dernick," Silk whispered, "Garion and I'll go next. You and Relg follow in a minute or so." He peered at Relg's face, shadowed beneath the Murgo hood. "Are you all right?" he asked.
"As long as I don't look up at the sky,"
Relg answered tightly. His voice sounded as if it were coming from between clenched teeth. "Come along then, Garion," Silk murmured. It required every ounce of Garion's self-control to walk at a normal pace across the frosty stones. It seemed somehow that eyes watched from every shadowy building and tower as he and the little Drasnian crossed the open section atop the wall. The air was dead calm and bitterly cold, and the stone blocks of the outer parapet were covered with a lacy filigree of rime frost. There was another scream from the temple lying somewhere ahead. The corner of a large tower jutted out at the end of the open stretch of wall, obscuring the walkway beyond. "Wait here a moment," Silk whispered as they stepped gratefully into its shadow, and he slipped around the jutting corner. Garion stood in the icy dark, straining his ears for any sound. He glanced once toward the parapet. Far out on the desolate wasteland below, a small fire was burning. It twinkled in the dark like a small red star. He tried to imagine how far away it might be. Then there was a slight scraping sound somewhere above him. He spun quickly, his hand going to his sword. A shadowy figure dropped from a ledge on the side of the tower several yards over his head, and landed, with cat-like silence, on the flagstones directly in front of him. Garion caught a familiar, sour, acid reek of stale perspiration.
"It's been a long time, hasn't it, Garion?"
Brill said quietly with an ugly chuckle. "Stay back," Garion warned, holding his sword with its point low as Barak had taught him.
"I knew that I'd catch you alone someday,"
Brill said, ignoring the sword. He spread his hands wide and crouched slightly, his cast eye gleaming in the starlight. Garion backed away, waving his sword threateningly. Brill bounded to one side, and Garion instinctively followed him with the sword point. Then, so fast that Garion could not follow, Brill dodged back and struck his hand down sharply on the boy's forearm. Garion's sword skittered away across the icy flagstones. Desperately, Garion reached for his dagger. Then, another shadow flickered in the darkness at the corner of the tower. Brill grunted as a foot caught him solidly in the side. He fell, but rolled quickly across the stones and came back up onto his feet, his stance wide and his hands moving slowly in the air in front of him. Silk dropped his Murgo robe behind him, kicked it out of the way, and crouched, his hands also spread wide. Brill grinned.
"I should have known you were around somewhere, Keldar."
"I suppose I should have expected you too, Cordok," Silk replied. "You always seem to show up." Brill flicked a quick hand toward Silk's face, but the little man easily avoided it. "How do you keep getting ahead of us?" he asked, almost conversationally. "That's a habit of yours that's starting to irritate Belgarath." He launched a quick kick at Brill's groin, but the cast-eyed man jumped back agilely. Brill laughed shortly.
"You people are too tender-hearted with horses," he said. "I've had to ride quite a few of them to death chasing you. How did you get out of that pit?" He sounded interested. "Tar Ergas was furious the next morning."
"What a shame."
"He had the guards flayed."
"I imagine a Murgo looks a bit peculiar without his skin." Brill dove forward suddenly, both hands extended, but Silk sidestepped the lunge and smashed his hand sharply down in the middle of Brill's back. Brill grunted again, but rolled clear farther out on the stones along atop the wall.
"You might be just as good as they say,"
he admitted grudgingly. "Try me, Cordok," Silk invited, with a nasty grin. He moved out from the wall of the tower, his hands in constant motion. Garion watched the two circling each other with his heart in his mouth. Brill jumped again, with both feet lashing out, but Silk dove under him. They both rolled to their feet again. Silk's left hand flashed out even as he came to his feet, catching Brill high on the head. Brill reeled from the blow, but managed to kick Silk's knee as he spun away.
"Your technique's defensive, Keldar,"
he grated, shaking his head to clear the effects of Silk's blow.
That's a weakness.
Just a difference of style, Cordok, Silk replied. Brill drove a gouging thumb at Silk's eye, but Silk blocked it and slammed a quick counterblow to the pit of his enemy's stomach. Brill scissored his legs as he fell, sweeping Silk's legs out from under him. Both men tumbled across the frosty stones and sprang to their feet again, their hands flickering blows faster than Garion's eyes could follow them. The mistake was a simple one, so slight that Garion could not even be sure it was a mistake. Brill flicked a jab at Silk's face that was an ounce or two harder than it should have been, and traveled no more than a fraction of an inch too far. Silk's hands flashed up and caught his opponent's wrist with a deadly grip, and he rolled backward toward the parapet, his legs coiling, even as the two of them fell. Jerked off balance, Brill seemed almost to dive forward. Silk's legs straightened suddenly, launching the cast-eyed man up and forward with a tremendous heave. With a strangled exclamation, Brill clutched desperately at one of the stone blocks of the parapet as he sailed over, but he was too high and his momentum was too great. He hurtled over the parapet, plunging out and down into the darkness below the wall. His scream faded horribly as he fell, lost in the sound of yet another shriek from the Temple of Torak. Silk rose to his feet, glanced once over the edge, and then came back to where Garion stood trembling in the shadows by the tower wall. "Silk!" Garion exclaimed, catching the little man's arm in relief.
What was that?
Belgarath asked, coming back around the corner. Brill, Silk replied blandly, pulling his Murgo robe back on.
Again?
Belgarath demanded with exasperation.
What was he doing this time?
Trying to fly last time I saw him. Silk smirked. The old man looked puzzled. He wasn't doing it very well, Silk added. Belgarath shrugged.
Maybe it'll come to him in time.
He doesn't really have all that much time. Silk glanced out over the edge. From far below, terribly far below, there came a faint, muffled crash. Then, after several seconds, another. Does bouncing count? Silk asked. Belgarath made a wry face.
Not really.
Then I'd say he didn't learn in time, Silk said blithely. He looked around with a broad smile. What a beautiful night this is, he remarked to no one in particular. Well, I think that's Brill's last appearance. Exit stage parapet. Exit center stage? I don't know.
Let's move along,
Belgarath suggested, throwing a quick, nervous glance at the eastern horizon.
It will start to lighten up over there any time now.
You were going to suggest he be on the next bingo card? I don't think that space is going to get filled in. They joined the others in the deep shadows beside the high wall of the temple, some 100 yards farther down the wall, and waited tensely for Relg and Dernick to catch up.
What kept you?
Barak whispered as they waited. I met an old friend of ours, Silk replied quietly. His grin was a flash of white teeth in the shadows. It was Brill, Garion told the rest of them in a hoarse whisper. He and Silk fought with each other, and Silk threw him over the edge. Mandarowlin glanced toward the frosty parapet. "'Tis a goodly way down," he observed. "Isn't it, though?" Silk agreed. Barak chuckled and put his big hand wordlessly on Silk's shoulder. Silk was definitely going to have to be the one that killed Brill. Just, there were too many parallels between them. Brill got the upper hand the last time they met. So it was going to have to, like, from the beginning. Well, maybe not from the beginning, but from the moment where Brill started to be a ninja, it was going to come down to Silk and Brill. Silk or Garion. Garion I could have seen if Brill remained more of sort of the thug he was introduced as. But I think once Brill became like a Dagashi, once we found out about the Dagashi, it was very satisfying that they were close to evenly matched and skilled. Definitely a little kung fu fighting there, huh? Whoa, whoa. Then Dernick and Relg came along the top of the wall to join them in the shadows.
"We have to go through the temple,"
Belgarath told them in a quiet voice.
"Pull your hoods as far over your faces as you can, and keep your heads down. Stay in single file, and mutter to yourselves as if you were praying. If anybody speaks to us, let me do the talking, and each time the gong sounds, turn toward the altar and bow."
He led them then to a thick door bound with weathered iron straps. He looked back once to be sure they were all in line, then put his hand to the latch and pushed the door open. The inside of the temple glowed with smoky red light, and a dreadful charnel house reek filled it. The door through which they entered led onto a covered balcony that curved around the back of the dome of the temple. A stone balustrade ran along the edge of the balcony, with thick pillars at evenly spaced intervals. The openings between the pillars were draped with the same coarse, heavy cloth from which the Murgo robes were woven. Along the back wall of the balcony were a number of doors, set deep in the stone. Garion surmised that the balcony was largely used by temple functionaries going to and fro on various errands. As soon as they started along the balcony, Belgarath crossed his hands on his chest and led them at a slow, measured pace, chanting in a deep, loud voice. A scream echoed up from below, piercing, filled with terror and agony. Garion involuntarily glanced through the parted drapery toward the altar. For the rest of his life, he wished he had not. The circular walls of the temple were constructed of polished black stone, and directly behind the altar was an enormous face, forged of steel and buffed to mirror brightness, the face of Torak, and the original of the steel masks of the Grolims. The face was beautiful, there was no question of that. Yet there was a kind of brooding evil in it, a cruelty beyond human ability to comprehend the meaning of the word. The temple floor facing the god's image was densely packed with Murgos and Grolim priests, kneeling and chanting an unintelligible rumble in a dozen dialects. In a dozen dialects, that's interesting. The altar stood on a raised dais directly beneath the glittering face of Torak. A smoking brazier, every time. Brazier, brazier, like Fraser. Brazier like Fraser. Every time. Brazier like Fraser. A smoking brazier on an iron post stood at each front corner of the blood-smeared altar, and a square pit opened in the floor immediately in front of the dais. Ugly red flames licked up out of the pit, and black, oily smoke rolled from it toward the dome high above. A half-dozen Grolims in black robes and steel masks were gathered around the altar, holding the naked body of a slave. The victim was already dead, his chest gaping open like the chest of a butchered hog, and a single Grolim stood in front of the altar, facing the image of Torak with raised hands. In his right, he held a long, curved knife. In his left, a dripping human heart.
"Behold our offering, dragon god of Angarak!"
he cried in a huge voice, then turned and deposited the heart in one of the smoking braziers. There was a burst of steam and smoke from the brazier, and a hideous sizzle as the heart dropped into the burning coals. From somewhere beneath the temple floor, the huge iron gong sounded, its vibration shimmering in the air. The assembled Murgos and their Grolim overseers groaned and pressed their faces to the floor. Garion felt a hand nudge his shoulder. Silk, already turned, was bowing toward the bloody altar. Awkwardly, sickened by the horror below, Garion also bowed. The 6 Grolims at the altar lifted the lifeless body of the slave almost contemptuously and cast it into the pit before the dais. Flames belched up and sparks rose in the thick smoke as the body fell into the fire below. A dreadful anger welled up in Garion. Without even thinking, he began to draw in his will, fully intent upon shattering that vile altar and the cruel image hovering above it into shards and fragments in a single cataclysmic unleashing of naked force.
"Belgarian,"
the voice within his mind said sharply.
"Don't interfere. This isn't the time."
"I can't stand it," Garion raged silently. "I've got to do something."
"You can't. Not now. You'll rouse the whole city. Unclench your will, Belgarian."
You'd call that Garion getting cocky or doing something unexpected. No, Hank. That could fit. He didn't actually follow through, but he started it. "Do as he says, Garion," Aunt Pole's voice sounded quietly in his mind. The unspoken recognition passed between Aunt Pole's mind and that strange other mind, as Garion helplessly let the anger and the will drain out from him.
"This abomination won't stand much longer, Belgarian," the voice assured him. "Even now the earth gathers to rid itself of it."
And then the voice was gone.
"What are you doing here? Doing up here?"
a harsh voice demanded. Garion jerked his eyes away from the hideous scene below. A masked and robed Grolim stood in front of Belgarath, blocking their way.
"We are the servants of Torak,"
the old man replied in an accent that perfectly matched the gutturals of Murgo's speech.
"All in Rak Cthol are the servants of Torak,"
the Grolim said.
"You aren't attending the ritual of sacrifice. Why?" "We're pilgrims from Rak Haga,"
Belgarath explained.
"Only just arrived in the dread city. We were commanded to present ourselves to the hierarch of Rak Haga in the instant of our arrival. That stern duty prevents our participation in the celebration."
The Grolim grunted suspiciously.
"Could the revered priest of the dragon god direct us to the chambers of the hierarch?
We are unfamiliar with the Dark Temple.
There was another shriek from below. As the iron gong boomed, the Grolim turned and bowed to the altar. Belgarath gave a quick jerk of his head to the rest of them, turned, and also bowed.
Go to the last door but one,
the Grolim instructed, apparently satisfied by their gestures of piety.
It will lead you down to the halls of the hierarchs. We are endlessly grateful to the priest of the Dark God.
Belgarath thanked him, bowing. They filed past the steel-masked Grolim, their heads down and their hands crossed on their breasts, muttering to themselves as if in prayer.
Vile!
Relg was strangling.
Obscenity! Abomination!
Keep your head down, Silk whispered. There are Grolims all around us.
As Ul gives me strength, I won't rest until Rak Cthol is laid waste.
Relg vowed in a fervent mutter. Belgarath had reached an ornately carved door near the end of the balcony, and he swung it open cautiously.
Is the Grolim still watching us?
He whispered to Silk. The little man glanced back at the priest standing some distance behind them. Yes. Wait. There he goes. The balcony's clear now. The sorcerer let the door swing shut, and stepped instead to the last door on the balcony. He tugged the latch carefully, and the door opened smoothly. He frowned.
It's always been locked before,
he muttered.
Do you think it's a trap?
Barak rumbled, his hand dipping under the Murgo robe to find his sword hilt.
It's possible, but we don't have much choice.
Belgarath pulled the door open the rest of the way, and they all slipped through as another shriek came from the altar. The door slowly closed behind them as the gong shuddered the stones of the temple. They started down the worn stone steps beyond the door. The stairway was narrow and poorly lighted, and it went down sharply, curving always to the right. "We're right up against the outer wall, aren't we?" Silk asked, touching the black stones on his left. Belgarath nodded.
The stairs lead down to Ktuchik's private place.
They continued down until the walls on either side changed from blocks to solid stone. "He lives below the city?" Silk asked, surprised.
Yes,
Belgarath replied.
He built himself a sort of hanging turret out from the rock of the peak itself.
"Strange idea," Dernick said. "Ktuchik's a strange sort of person," Aunt Pole told him, grimly. Belgarath stopped them. I gotta...
The stairs go down about another 100 feet, he whispered. There'll be 2 guards just outside the door to the turret. Not even Ktuchik could change that, no matter what he's planning.
Sorcerers?
Barak asked softly.
No. The guards are ceremonial more than functional. They're just ordinary Grolims.
We'll rush them then.
That won't be necessary. I can get you close enough to deal with them, but I want it quick and quiet.
The old man reached inside his Murgo robe and drew out a roll of parchment bound with a strip of black ribbon. He started down again with Barak and Mandaralin close behind him. The curve of the stairway brought a lighted area into view as they descended. Torches illuminated the bottom of the stone steps, and a kind of antechamber hewn from the solid rock. 2 Grolim priests stood in front of the plain black door, their arms folded.
Who approaches the Holy of Holies?
One of them demanded, putting his hand to his sword hilt.
A messenger,
Belgarath announced importantly.
I bear a message for the master from the hierarch of Rak Cthol.
He held the rolled parchment above his head.
Approach, messenger. Praise the name of the disciple of the dragon god of Angarak.
Belgarath boomed as he marched down the steps with Mandaralin and Barak flanking him. He reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped in front of the steel-masked guards.
Thus have I performed my appointed task,
he declared, holding out the parchment. One of the guards reached for it, but Barak caught his arm in a huge fist. The man's other hand closed swiftly about the surprised Grolim's throat. The other guard's hand flashed toward his sword hilt, but he grunted and doubled over sharply as Mandaralin thrust a long, needle-pointed poignard up into his belly. That's just a guess at how that's pronounced. Poniard. I know it's a type of knife, but dagger. I believe designed for punching through armor, or maybe through chainmail specifically. With a kind of deadly concentration, the knight twisted the hilt of the weapon, probing with the point deep inside the Grolim's body. The guard shuddered when the blade reached his heart, and collapsed with a long, gurgling sigh. Barak's massive shoulder shifted, and there was a grating crunch as the bones in the first Grolim's neck came apart in his deadly grip. The guard's feet scraped spasmodically on the floor for a moment, and then he went limp.
I feel better already,
Barak muttered, dropping the body.
You and Mandaralin stay here,
Belgarath told him.
I don't want to be disturbed once I'm inside. We'll see to it,
Barak promised.
What about these?
He pointed at the two dead guards.
Dispose of them, Relg,
Belgarath said shortly to the Olgo. Silk turned his back quickly as Relg knelt between the two bodies and took hold of them, one with each hand. There was a sort of muffled slithering as he pushed down, sinking the bodies into the stone floor.
You left a foot sticking out,
Barak observed in a detached tone. Do you have to talk about it? Silk demanded. Belgarath took a deep breath and put his hand to the iron door handle.
All right,
he told them quietly.
Let's go, then.
He pushed open the door. And that's the end of chapter 26, and the end of the reading for tonight. Poignard? That's surprising for me. It's the perfect crime. Cliffhanger, right? Also, literally, they're hanging from a cliff. So, I mean, the weird turret thing they're in is hanging from the cliff anyways. Poignard? Really not how I expected it to be pronounced. There is probably, I'm sure, a, anglicized version. I see, more like poignard. Or because P-O-N... P-O-N-I-A-R-D. So there's no O-I in it. In the version I just read is spelled like that. Ponyard. Turret, which once again Dernick shows his judginess of architecture. Very subtly. He was hiding it. How strange. What did he actually say? Strange idea, Dernick said. Poniard? Poniard? I think that's kind of what I said originally. Poniard. So, I might have kind of gotten... I don't think that was Garion getting cocky, because it was done out of rage. Right? It wasn't out of, like, self-confidence. It was just that I'm going to smash that. But I think we got Garion does something unexpected, maybe. I think I'll leave it for now. I think we can do better. One chapter to go in this book, and we are, and not even that many pages, only like 11 or 12 pages. So, how are things going to end for this delve into the heart of evil? Also, I'm going to take on this god in his most central temple. Sort of. I mean, everybody knows it's like that wasn't actually Torak. That was a mask, right? That was a representation of Torak. Because Torak is asleep still, or unconscious, right? Zedar is carrying Torak's body somewhere. I see. There's just a different spelling of it. Makes sense. Well, I think we wait until the end of the next chapter, until the end of this book. And then if Garion hasn't done something better, then I'll fill it in. Not saying that he's going to. But I think this counts for doing something unexpected. But I'm going to leave it for now. I'll give it a little circle. Give it a small one, like a temporary placeholder circle, just up in the corner here. So as expected, the Dark Temple is pretty horrific. It's awful. Yeah. We're almost done. We're almost done, everybody. And it took us to the end of this book, but we got our first bingo. Bingo! So, congratulations on that. I'll have to figure out something for next Wednesday to do a little celebration, along with celebrating the end of the book. But I need to figure out something for dinner and also do more cleaning tonight. Gotta clean the kitchen a bit and some floors before our house showing tomorrow. Cease the human sacrifice and just hire a temple screamer. They just play a recording of the Wilhelm scream, is that right? Is it Wilhelm? Or is it something else entirely? You have to be real careful about your voice if you were a professional screamer. Learn the Drazdian secret language for day-to-day conversation and have an interpreter to speak for you. Yeah, Wilhelm scream. The most surprising thing for you is how little they value the human beings. Yeah, it's interesting that it doesn't seem to matter who gets sacrificed. It's totally, it does. Who gives a heck if it's a slave or, someone important or whatever? It's just, basically, it sounded like it was done by lottery. Actually, I think the Thullish one was done by lottery, and if the Thull owned a slave, the slave could take their place. This is an Emergo city, and I think it's just slaves here. In religions you know about, sacrifice is about giving something valuable to a god, but this seems to be that they're giving what they think is crap. Yeah, no, I think it just... well, because this is a thing where their god was like, hey, sacrifice humans to me, right? Torak himself was like, this is what I want. I want human hearts. Indiana Jones Temple of Doom vibes. Kalima! They did kind of address that, but yeah, it's sort of a, I don't know. When Torak was walking around on the face of the planet, he probably stood in front of the entire city or in front of a congregation of priests and told them what to do for their rituals. Or maybe gave them an outline at least, or something, and maybe they made up some of the details themselves. Well, on that pleasant note, I'm going to start a raid over to Bear, because he's streaming some Deep Rock Galactic right now. Yeah, so go say hi to him. And we'll finish this book next Wednesday. Assuming that, nothing comes up. So thanks, everyone. Happy Friday. Have a good weekend. Wish me luck on our house showing tomorrow. Maybe we'll get really lucky and I won't be able to stream next week because we'll be in the middle of moving or something like that. That'd be great. All right. Have a good night, everyone. See you next week. Thank you.